you in a moment to somebody who has, really startling inside knowledge of the regime there. First of all, just a little bit of background. Since the August 9th election in Belarus, hundreds of thousands of people have demonstrated in Belarus daily and weekly, and it hasn't stopped. And what they are demonstrating against is widespread election fraud by the ex-president, Alexander Lukashenko, who ran by any measure what was a fraudulent election and has continually refused to step down and give in to the will of people. It is a violent tug of war that is taking place in Belarus, and it continues, and there is a lot at stake.
Hello. 4.
Country. And, I want to stop there for a sec, Andre, because when I was thinking about introducing you today, it's very easy because these things roll off our tongues as journalists. And sometimes we don't understand. But imagine if you're American or you're Canadian or you're British or you're living anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the world and you have been forced to flee your country. It is a startling thing for somebody like Andre, who served in the government, was loyal to his country, believes in Belarus.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, to say very emotionally, it's an understatement. You don't sleep at night. You are following the events. You are talking to friends. You are thinking about how to help, how else to help, and you are being, and you feel very frustrated that there is no real knowledge of the Belarusian situation in the world. Still, there is no knowledge, and there are no adequate measures taken by the democratic world towards against this dictator, ruthless dictator, and his thugs. Yeah, it is very difficult, very, as you said, emotional. Astonishing courage of the Belarusian people, the fascinating behavior, and the resoluteness with which they peacefully fight this murderous regime. Murderous because it started murdering people as early as the 90s, and not only the politicians. We know about the 4 cases in 1999 and 2000, but also, as Lukashenko confessed himself several times, they were shooting criminals without any trial, without any prosecution. I mean,
but they were criminals.
Yeah, they were criminals, but they were killed by Lukashenko bodyguards. It is, in the plain light, in the daylight, it's without any, even without any, pretense of doing justice to this that he allegedly saved people from the 32 criminal groups, only to organize the only criminal group on the territory.
All right, let me stop you for a second and roll this back a little bit, and that is fall of the Soviet Union, and all of these countries declare independence. The Baltics, the Stans, and Belarus. Lukashenko wins in a democratic election. Everybody thinks, that Eastern Europe has become democratic. What happened after that?
But there are different histories behind Baltic states, for example, and Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, those countries that are in the European part of the former Soviet Union, and those countries who are in Asian part. There are absolutely different histories. Baltics were lucky to, so to say, in inverted commas, to be under the occupation for 40 years. We've been under the Soviet totalitarian regime for more than 70 years. And Lukashenko was not elected immediately. We had a parliamentary republic. for the first 3 years at least. And that was, I think, that saved us from many mistakes that were made around us. But then the leadership of Belarus at that time, I mean the cabinet of ministers, was really incompetent, and they were driving country into stagnation. And then this populist came, named Alexander Lukashenko, who, as any populist, said that I have recipes for everything. I will restart economy in a new way that will benefit everybody in Belarus. And that was democratic election, but one thing should be underlined, that this was election against, not for. I mean, the vote was against the stagnation of then Prime Minister Vyacheslav Kibich in favor of the populists. So it was clearly, because Lukashenko was little known, and he promised a lot, but he was not known for delivering anything. So people just believe his speeches. Yeah, he was a farm manager before that. He served also in prison as the prison guard. He was doing the on petty party post positions, and so no, he was very loudmouth populist, and in a way he ushered the era of populism in the world. I sometimes I think that now we have so many populists in the democratic world as well that union. Yes, I ran against him in 2010. Why? Because it was clear that the country was going into the abyss. Because after some several more or less economically successful years, because of Russian subsidies, the crisis of 2008, the financial crisis, really indicated that Lukashenko in Belarus, and we're talking all our friends and all our partners in the West and democratic world, that we have to deal with it, not only us in Belarus, but also in Europe and the United States and Canada, those who are interested in values, not in the that the election will be rigged. And we had a very strong support from the people, not as strong as the anti-Lukashenko movement has today. So we were offering negotiations at that time, not only to the dictator himself, but mostly to the people in his government and to the official circles. But it was rejected, and we were thrown in jail because Lukashenko was ordered himself personally, and that was the signal. He ordered himself personally the brutal dispersal, brutal crackdown of the innocent, peaceful demonstration and innocent civilians. It was a signal that he will be ready if pardoned, if this kind of crackdown is ignored, then we will have to really we have to expect something more.
We made a mistake in the West because that was really the first fire when the West should have really leaned on Belarus and forced him to rehold that election or cancel that election. And in the end, he got away with it. And that now, fast forward to this summer, he's held this election by every single country's estimation from America to Britain to all of the European Union now. He stole an election, and it was falsified. So now, Andre, they've taken out the sanctions against Belarus. What is that going to do? They've named some people in Belarus, and they've said that they are going to, freeze assets abroad, travel bans. Is that
it's very good that you say we made a mistake, but it's Dana Lewis says so. I don't hear anybody from democratic countries saying the same thing. I don't hear anybody recognizing the mistakes. I don't hear.
Forgive me for that, but this is coming from my years in Eastern Europe as a correspondent based in Moscow for 12 years. And I understand through a lot of the former Soviet countries that did not embrace democracy very well, where democracy was stillborn, that we probably should have tried to deal with Lukashenko in that year rather than this summer. Now we have to deal with him now, but it was allowed people to.
Yeah, absolutely. And the world should have dealt with Lukashenko in 1999 when there were political murders in Belarus. That was the most horrible year for Belarusians until this year because the opposition was destroyed, the leaders were murdered, and there was no reaction at that time. Everybody was keeping very quiet, yes, introducing some sanctions, condemning, making statements. But it continued. You will be astonished to find out that till this time, European Union was providing assistance to Lukashenko's police, for example. That as that in September 16, in the midst of all this crackdown of people being brutally beaten, killed, and even raped in prison, the Lukashenko police got surveillance drones from European Union. Canadian company supplied the water cannons for Belarusian police, which are being used extensively now in Belarus. And there are many, many other examples like that. So,
In fairness to Canada, because I'm Canadian, so I mean, I think that I was shocked that those water cannons were ever sold to Lukashenko. But in fairness, Canada has now also taken out sanctions against, I believe, against Lukashenko himself, and they're one of the few countries to do it. The UK in Canada, the European Union sanctions stop short of actually sanctioning Lukashenko himself.
but to answer your question about the sanctions, I think that these personal sanctions, targeted sanctions, are nothing. Because if there was not a history of lifting the sanctions without any preconditions being met by the regime, then we could probably talk about their efficiency. Otherwise, the sanctions were introduced when I was in jail. They were lifted in 2016 to encourage Lukashenko to continue with his politics, to encourage Lukashenko to strengthen the regime. People in jail, the numbers are in thousands, and the last Sunday there were 714 people detained, arrested. So it is horrible, really.
Right.
I always answer this question.
Sorry, when you say horrible, I don't think people in the West have watched everything that's going on because I keep a pretty close eye on it. You know, here's a list like elderly people being tear gassed on the weekend because a lot of the demonstrations have been carried out by elderly people that are going peacefully to the street waving flags. Students being arrested in university, dragged out of university. Beatings where men and women are grabbed on the street and you can hear in the video them beating them in the vans where they are arresting them. And incredibly, some of the crowd then turns on the police, and there are violent confrontations at times between the crowd, essentially beating these policemen and these masked KGB people back from grabbing people off the street and forcing them to let some of them go. I mean, it is very violent, and it is shocking to see this in Europe today.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and it is the question is if there is a political will in the West to deal with this situation, because it is dangerous not only for us as Belarusians but also for the world. It is dangerous. Clearly it's a security breach. Clearly it's a threat to the international security. And you're asking about the sanctions. Okay, you're now talking from England, where you sanctions and not announcing, but declaring this OMON, riot police, a criminal organization, terrorist organization internationally. And there is a petition now in international criminal procedures against Lukashenko and his regime. So, these sanctions are not really sanctions. I mean, the one that are being discussed in the European Union, that are introduced by Canada, by Great Britain, by United States, they are travel bans. They are mild restrictions to travel to the part of the world to the real criminals.
Very muscular. What should we be doing? What should we be doing?
Financial, and it is morally justifiable, because all these strong measures should be tied to the release of political prisoners and cessation.
Sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, but because you're raising such interesting points all the time, and I have to jump in. Why is this not, when you say it's criminal, why is this guy not headed for The Hague? Why is this not at a certain point? Does it become a war crime?
It is. In my view, it's a genocide that is going now. It could be compared with genocide and with war crime. But we are so weak with universal jurisdiction that some people have to work on it now. I mean lawyers, I mean real specialists or legal specialists, because that those who are occupying the positions, formally occupying the position of rulers of the countries, they are not persecuted properly. So now in Europe, the European skillful attitude towards such cases, such difficult cases. We need international expertise. We need really, I think Belarus.
But you arrive at this argument in the West where people feel that the West should stay out of it because if they get too involved in it, that will anger Putin in Russia, and that will bring the Russians into the conflict, and that it will escalate the conflict. What is your
It's not opinion. It's, Russia is already there. Russia is working not only on Belarusian state TV as propagandists, they're lying to the people, but Russian security forces are working with Lukashenko.
Because they're worried about it coming to Russia. They're worried about these same demonstrations like the ones that were being organized by the poisoned opposition member Alexei Navalny. They're worried about it starting in Russia as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. They are worrying about something, and the West doesn't worry about something in Belarus. Because why to be so shy saying that no, it will be taken as interference? I hear it for 20 years, for more than 20 years already. Russia is doing everything it wants in Belarus and plays Lukashenko together with Lukashenko against the West, and the West is still being very timid. The one very simple thing should be recognized: there is nobody more supportive of dictatorial, aggressive policies of Russia. Impunity of the real thugs, of real criminals. I think Bill Browder is doing a lot with
Bill Browder, just for people who don't know who he is, was a businessman who was operating in Russia. Eventually, his assets were seized, and his lawyer Magnitsky was jailed and died in prison. And since then, Browder has carried on a campaign worldwide to bring about the Magnitsky Act sanctions against members of Putin's inner circle. And he continues to campaign for them, and people have adopted them from Canada to America, and the EU is still. Britain has adopted them, and the EU is still, I think, wading through it, and they are taking parts of those sanctions against individuals. Andre, are you concerned that the
Yes, of course I'm concerned. I'm very concerned for many years, not only now, because I know that they are capable of that. But what it really means today, that they want, by any means, they want to provoke violence in Belarus. Since Belarusian demonstrators and protesters are being so peaceful, so resolute to stay non-violent, that they are doing everything. They started with all kinds of claims that Poland and Lithuania are financing the bands of, the groups of violent groups in Belarus, and they blamed other countries also. But they really want to provoke violence. And Lukashenko himself, I think he confessed that he was getting ready to order the provocation against the headquarters of the opposition during the elections. And I think that these people can be expected to do anything. That's why we need strong reaction, because the escalation of violence happens because Lukashenko was not on the list of even those mild sanctions. He reads signals of the West very clearly, much better than the West reads his signals.
Tommy, I want to just wrap this up, but I hope that, the idea that he wants to provoke violence and use live ammunition on crowds, I think will take this to a completely different level, and the foreign outrage, the outrage in the West, I think nobody will accept that, and I think if he's toying with the notion of using live ammunition on crowds, I think that will be the end of him. Hopefully it will be the end of him, but hopefully we don't get to that stage, Andre.
I hope so, because we really need to think about how to resolve this crisis without Lukashenko being ruler of the country and without Lukashenko giving orders. Because today I think the West has all the leverage. For example, why those Belarusian ambassadors that didn't switch sides are not kicked out of the countries? Why they're still allowed to function and to pretend that they represent country and the citizens? They do not represent Belarusians. They do not represent country. Lukashenko kicked out the ambassadors of Belarus. Why the West is tolerating those spies and the servants of the dictator? And there are many other things. Because when I hear the questions, what can we do? I sorry, but I do take it that we don't have political will to do much. So let's discuss it at least. I think it's the time for discussion. Of course, never is never over, but the discussion has to have some very practical results.
All right, if you're just joining us, and we're just wrapping this up now, Andrei Sanikov, so generous with his time today, is the former deputy foreign minister of Belarus. He ran against the ex-president now, because nobody recognizes him as the real president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. He was jailed. He was tortured. He speaks to us from Warsaw, Poland, because he has been forced to flee his own country. Andrei, the last question I want to ask you is, America has always been the superpower that has been able to wade into these situations, sometimes successfully, sometimes making the situation worse. One would expect that the President of the United States would be warning Belarus now against using live ammunition, against escalating the violence, demanding that he release political prisoners. But Donald Trump has been very silent, whether it's anything to do with Russia's sphere of influence, and people are extremely critical of him for not speaking out against potential bounties against U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, not speaking out against Putin's aggression in Syria and elsewhere. Are you in any way thinking that Joe Biden, if he is able to win the election in November, would be somebody that would be more helpful? And are you looking for a more sympathetic ear from America if Biden is in the White House?
I don't want to interfere into internal affairs of the United States. But we need America. We need American leadership, not only us in Belarus, but in the world, I think. We need real American leadership because even the case of, political prisoners in Belarus, when America took strong decisions like in 2010, in 2011, about the sanctions, about economic sanctions, and political prisoners were released. So we need America back in the world with the leadership role.
I think most people believe that there needs to be a strong America on the diplomatic front. But America also has to set some good examples about its own democracy right now. And right now, that's very challenged in November. I'm just reading one of the comments, Andrei, and maybe I could ask it to you. I'm no expert, but maybe moving NATO armies on the border of Belarus would distract Lukashenko from protests and let protesters remove him from office. What's your comment on that? On NATO in any way moving towards Belarus?
And that's what Lukashenko wants. What Lukashenko already announced, that NATO is ready to attack Belarus, which is nonsense. No, I don't think it will be a solution. It will be. I think it will contribute to the problem, not to the solution. I think. Yeah, absolutely. I think Jens Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, was very clear about his assessment of Lukashenko and the election in Belarus. And I think that the statement of General Secretary says it clearly that NATO will not tolerate any aggressiveness coming from Belarus or coming from Russia through Belarus. That is, I think, very good position to keep for the time being.
Andrei Sanikov, thank you so much for your time. Andrei is the former deputy foreign minister of Belarus. He was jailed by Lukashenko. He was tortured by Lukashenko. He has fled the country, and he is now one of the most important voices for Belarus to speak out and bring us all a little bit of backstory education on what is taking place there. Andrei, this is really my last question. You often call Lukashenko on Twitter crazy Lukashenko. Do you believe he is doing crazy things, or do you believe that Lukashenko is crazy himself?
We had a very famous diagnosis of Lukashenko made in the 90s by a doctor who is living now in the United States, and he diagnosed him with mosaic psychopathy. And I think that the things that he is saying today and doing today, it is not the things that an adequate and sane person would do. That's why I call him what he is today. But we shall overcome, and I think that you will see Belarus as an asset for the world peace and human rights and democracy, instead of this regime that is being threatened, that is threatening everybody around. So long live Belarus, живе Belarus.
Much, and I think more than anything, if you are watching what's happening in Belarus, I don't think anybody will not be moved at these scenes of peaceful demonstrators on the weekends, especially. Watch it and follow it as people there peacefully attempt to struggle for freedom, attempt to get a president who a lot of people think is mad, who is committing crimes, arresting and torturing and beating and wrongly jailing political opposition and almost anybody on the street that these black masked KGB thugs are coming into contact with. I don't think anybody wouldn't be moved by watching what's happening there. And we wish the people of Belarus all the best. Thanks for watching this broadcast. I'm Dana Lewis. You can, if you missed some of this, you can watch it again. But Andrei Senikov will also be on our back story with Dana Lewis podcast. He has been a guest with us before, and we thank him so much.